The initiant's body went still and then convulsed, collapsing against the stone slab beneath the priestess' hands. Betrayal tightened the archivist's jaw within seconds of seeing the scene. He stepped forward on brittle shoes and counted pulses with a scholar's steadiness, not a layman's panic. Someone in the gallery hissed, "Hold the incense, do not break formation," and the acolyte beside the priestess tightened his grip on the cord. The immediate problem was observable and brutal. The ritual had moved from controlled feint to real bodily crisis, and the order as doctrine presented inside that chamber either taught obedience or engineered it. Within minutes the room delivered a lesson in both power and danger. The archivist resolved to trace how instruction had become death. The archivist, 45 and thin, wore his scholarly robes as a uniform, charcoal black, a deep crimson sash, and a weathered leather grimoire strapped to his hip. He did not speak his name aloud here. He read the room instead, finger taps, the way a scout reads a map. His first action was procedural. He ordered an acolyte to secure the door, watched the priestess' jaw and catalogued the scent of low, burning resin and metallic iron on the slab. The immediate, physical details guided him. The chant cadence, the placement of the candle hallow, the way a spare acolyte stood in the hypogeum's shadow. Those facts mattered because they could be reproduced and tested. Outside the hypogeum, the ruined temple courtyard smelled of wet stone and animal dung. The archivist kept his eyes on the survivor first. The former acolyte, thin, jaw set, both wrists rimmed with faded rope marks, refused to meet his gaze. "Tell me the name of the teacher." The archivist. He spoke with a measured baritone and a silence that demanded answers. The former acolyte's mouth opened, closed, and then a single word slipped free. "The teacher is the way we prove truth." That phrase held doctrine and an admission. The archivist heard it as both scripture and justification. Betrayal changed his pace. He moved from quiet cataloging to forceful questioning. Who staged the vision? He asked. Who scripted the revelation? The former acolyte blinked. He had the look of a man carrying a secret that kept him upright, and that could topple him if released. The archivist leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the grimoire strap, and waited. The survivor named the priestess by ritual name, Kairos, and the acolyte who tightened the cord, Joth. The naming gave the archivist a map. Priestess Kairos, acolyte Joth, initiant unknown. He had reason now to believe the collapse was intentional. They moved into a candlelit study, while the night held a thin wind against cracked windows. The former acolyte lit a candle with hands that trembled just enough to show strain when he placed it by a rolled papyrus. The archivist sat across and opened the grimoire to compare handwriting. The papyrus lay unrolled, margins stained with brown and red, blood ink mixed deliberately into the pigment. The acolyte pointed to a diagram of concentric rings labeled with stages. Withdrawal threshold, teacher, appearance, obedience test. This is the curriculum. The acolyte said, "We follow the rings." His voice held both pride and shame. The archivist's fingers traced the blood-inked lines. He recorded the exact angle of the ink strokes and the pressure marks where a stylus had scraped too deep. "Who wrote the margin notes?" he asked. The acolyte spat a short laugh and said, "Kairos. She writes the questions and the answers." That answer shifted the archivist's suspicion into a clearer accusation. Kairos wrote both the script and its margins. He realized the order taught obedience by manufacturing authority. They reconstructed the hypogeum, side gallery next. The archivist arranged clay lamps, methodically placing them where his notes suggested Kairos had stood. The reconstructed vision showed lighting placed to throw the initiant's face into a half shadow, while a second light reflected off a polished bronze disc to create a phantom halo. Scent pouches hidden in the gallery produced a hallucinatory nausea when crushed. Joth, the acolyte, had been trained to produce a fainting fit at a designated cue. The archivist watched Joth perform the cue with the mechanical precision of someone who had practiced survival as choreography, and he noted how the ritual's instruments layered to create a convincing apparition. Midway through the reconstruction, the former acolyte stopped and said, "We pushed one too far." "I pushed the cord harder that night." His voice fractured the methodical sequence. "He had introduced a new variable. You accelerated it." the archivist. The acolyte did not deny it. He kept saying Kairos needed proof. She needed absolute, inescapable devotion. The confession created a new problem. The Order's ritual had been weaponized by an individual. The archivist recorded this as fact and felt a second emotional shift under the surface: doubt. Doubt in whether exposure would save people or only scatter the Order into more violent secrecy. They returned to the courtyard where the ruined altar sat half, buried in moss and pigeon feathers. The archivist demanded Kairos' orders and the evidence that confirmed her method. The former acolyte dug in the satchel and produced a sealed reliquary note. An administrative directive stamped with an emblem the archivist recognized from other manuscripts he had catalogued. The seal bore a 6-pointed wheel and a Latin phrasing tied to initiation codes. He felt the shift from suspicion to a grim clarity. Institutional backing existed. At nightfall they forced open a sealed reliquary chamber beneath a collapsed arch. The archivist moved with careful hands. He protected the edges of fragile vellum. He catalogued the smell when the lid broke, a layer of burnt resin and old ash. He pulled aside a thin cloth and found a charred theatrical mask, its features scorched and its eye slits rimmed with a residue telling of painted iron oxide. Beneath the mask lay annotated orders, brittle with age, each line written in Kairos' hand and signed by a triad of names. The archivist's suspicion hardened into certainty. The ritual teacher had been a staged performance sanctioned by the Order's leadership. The moment of exposure was not cinematic in a dramatic sense. It was mechanical and awful. The archivist read aloud one directive: if the initiation resists, accelerate the fall. The teacher must speak clearly. His measured voice filled the reliquary and the former acolyte's shoulders collapsed. Didn't he expect the lines to be literal? The acolyte said, I thought the feint would be enough. I didn't mean. He could not finish. The archivist interrupted with practical commands. Document, photograph, keep the mask intact, tag the parchment. His training pushed him into preservation even while his hands shook. A confrontation followed in low voices near the breaths of the archive lamps. The former acolyte lashed out verbally at Kairos. He named her as the one who chose who lived or died. He blamed her for the accelerated near-death event. Kairos did not answer because Kairos was not present. Her absence became a presence in accusation. The archivist pushed harder. Who ordered the seal? Who signs for the triad? The acolyte recited 3 names, repeating them until the sounds scraped like dry leaves. Each name shifted their map and introduced responsibility beyond a single rogue priestess. The archivist realized the Order's method was embedded at multiple levels. They argued then hot and fast, you let a boy die for doctrine. The archivist, you used the body for pedagogy. The acolyte snapped back, we made believers. That is the work. The exchange intensified. 3 rapid back and forth lines followed. You lied to me, the archivist. You lied to everyone. Kairos lied first, the acolyte said. Kairos wrote the questions and the answers, the archivist. Kairos chose who would hear the teacher. The argument exposed fractures. The Order's doctrine, the acolyte's obedience, and the archivist's demand for accountability. They staged one more reconstruction inside the Hypogeum gallery to confirm specifics. The archivist ordered the lamps into the same positions as before and asked Joth to place the scent pouches in his exact hands. Joth performed with the fidelity of trained muscle memory. The archivist watched the initiation sequence once more, this time taking notes of specific triggers. The footstep on the 3rd slab, the smoke rolled from the brazier at the priestess's left, the whistle blown once the initiant murmured. Those concrete triggers proved the sequence repeatable. The archivist felt an emotion shift again, fear for the initiants who would follow this curriculum, and then a sharpened resolve to stop it. A mid-chapter cliffhanger arrived when the archivist found a marginal notation that disagreed with the rest. An erased line with the words, accelerate only when necessary, underlined twice. The phrasing suggested internal debate inside the Order and implied someone had tried to temper the violence but failed. The archivist could not trace the erasure to a hand at once. He held the papyrus to the candle and found tiny hairline cuts around the margin, an attempt to hide a signature. That small discovery changed everything. The order had internal opponents, and the act of erasure suggested a cover-up. At the ark's peak, when tension must match the reliquary's reveal, the archivist pried the reliquary fully open and lifted the charred mask with linen gloves. He found beneath it a folded sheet of administrative orders annotated with performance cues, a teacher voice, low, authoritative, hallow angle, 45 degrees. Fainting cue. Throat pinch, 3 counts. The document named a list of authorized performers. The archivist read the authorized names aloud. The air in the reliquary grew thick with the sound of breathing and the metallic scrape of a pen. When he read Kairos' final line, "Absolute obedience is the proof of truth," the former acolyte's sneeze gave out and he knelt. The climactic confrontation followed. The archivist did not shout. He catalogued and then confronted. Why would the order authorize staged deaths? He asked, why the charred mask? The former acolyte answered in broken sentences. They death taught humility. A direct touch of mortality made believers listen. Kairos, the teacher, is irrefutable when the body crosses the line. I believed it because I saw faces change after the vision. The archivist pressed further. Did you ever see a real teacher? The acolyte's answer was a single line. No. The teacher always arrived on cue. The confession completed the climactic turn. The teacher never existed. The order had invented the authority it demanded. After the reveal, grief arrived in physical terms. The former acolyte pressed his palms into his eyes until his tears left red smears on his skin. He retched once, then bent over the reliquary and began unfastening the mask's burned straps as if undoing the lie could reduce the pain. The archivist catalogued those motions. He felt a shame dissolving into a cold, methodical decision about what to do with the documents. He argued with himself in quick mental flashes. Expose the names and risk violent reprisals, or withhold certain pages to protect survivors. That internal debate translated into a real action. He made a copy. The copy required time and heat. The archivist set 2 lamps at different angles and used his grimoire as vellum to trace the annotations line by line. He numbered each paragraph and photographed the mask at 3 exposures. The former acolyte watched without speaking, fingers worrying the hem of his robe. Every external event here drove action. A lamp guttered and the archivist relit it. An unexpected rat scuttled and both men flinched. Footsteps sounded on the ruined threshold and then faded. Each interruption forced them to work faster and to decide which items to prioritize. A twist arrived before the chapter's resolution. The archivist found a second set of marginal notes in a different hand, smaller, more cramped. That hand had written the words, "For preservation only," and had signed with initials that matched a different triad name. The smaller hand had argued against accelerating the fall. It had been overruled, and the presence of that dissent allowed the archivist to understand that not all within the order supported Kairos' extremity. He now faced not only a guilty priestess, but a factional conflict inside the institution. The discovery reframed the earlier confession and suggested a pathway for targeted accountability rather than a full, indiscriminate purge. They left the reliquary at dawn. The sky cut pale lines across the courtyard. Pigeons settled on broken columns. The archivist carried the mask wrapped in linen and the copies stacked in his satchel. He did not trust the surviving former acolyte to keep his composure. He watched the man's hands as they gripped the satchel's strap. The archivist offered a simple directive: stay in town. Tell no one the names until we decide how to proceed. That instruction was tactical. It limited immediate danger while preserving evidence. Back in his study, the archivist worked with a deliberate economy of motion. He set the papyrus on the table and compared the copied annotations to the originals. He photographed the charred mask at 5 angles and recorded the precise pigment residues. The emotional movement here was small and careful. Regret that people had been harmed, a grim determination to record facts, and a practical worry about the unknowns that remained. He felt responsibility for the survivors and unease about the power the order still held. The chapter's final action resolved the immediate conflict without pretending to end the larger story. The archivist slipped a carefully folded copy of the blood-inked papyrus into his weathered leather grimoire and sealed the reliquary's remaining notes back inside. He wrote beside his photograph a single line: "Preserve. Do not publish until council is convened." He did not announce this action aloud or address an audience. The night closed with the grimoire weight on his lap and the mask wrapped on the table. He left a question unresolved deliberately. Which names would be exposed first, and which would be protected to dismantle the order without unleashing its hidden violence? The final paragraph ends with a concrete decision. The archivist drew the grimoire's clasp across and placed the masked photographs in the inner pocket. Then he slid the partial papyrus into a fold he would not open, and he closed the study door behind him, locking it by hand. They hauled the archivist into the cloister courtyard as sunlight cut across his robes and a dozen acolytes pointed with thin, accusing fingers. Suspicion tightened his jaw before he had time to speak. He kept his hands visible and let his satchel hang at his side where guards could see it. He violated the right, someone shouted. The voice belonged to Priestess Lysandra. Guards stepped forward and corners of the great hall rearranged into a tribunal. The accusation came fast and concrete. The Initian lay on a low stone slab beneath a cluster of candles, his pulse shallow and his fingers curled like a child's. He had been the man who froze and then convulsed in the last ceremony. An event the archivist had watched from the gallery in the previous night's record, and had the scar of that memory in the way his hand still hovered near the leather grimoire at his belt. He had moved forward to count pulses, to test for life, and that small act was now charged as an intrusion. The central problem was clear. Uncovering how the death-like state had been induced exposed the school's methods, and exposure would cost him the right to look. The Hierophant Elias ascended the dais with measured steps. He smelled of boiled herbs and stale incense. His ring flashed as he gestured. Archivist, Elias, slow and flat, explain yourself before the assembly. The archivist kept his baritone steady. I examined the body to record the rite. I only sought the sequence. Acolyte murmurs moved through the courtyard like a wind across leaves. Merca Pale, faced acolyte who had been among the gallery the night before, watched with his mouth pressed tight. He did not look away. Lysandra stepped forward. Her voice had the hard edge of someone used to command. You desecrated a covenant. Hand over your notes, she named the penalty plainly. A guard reached toward the archivist's satchel. The archivist eased his hand back and let the guard see leather, cord, the bone-handled compass, the fold of parchment at the top. He did not resist. His suspicion had not been idle. It had driven him to this courtyard and to the decision to open the Initian's shroud. If the school could claim sacrilege and bury the evidence, no one outside would learn how the rite controlled obedience. Healer Thalia stepped between lines of accusation and the slab, her fingers stained with compounds from the infirmary. Wait, she said, let me examine him first. Thalia worked with care. She had the blunt honesty of someone who treated wounds and numbers rather than reputations. She peeled back the linen and found a small pack tucked beneath the Initian's ribs, folded over and stained, a folded papyrus glued with blood. The courtyard inhaled. This concrete discovery shifted the accusation. What had been framed as simple intrusion now suggested deliberate manipulation. Elias' face tightened. He barked an order and Lysandra's eyes narrowed at the sight of the blood. Stiffened papyrus, bring that here, she demanded. Marek's hands clenched. The archivist watched the priestess approach the slab with a movement that had the economy of ritual. He felt an emotion move through him. Suspicion pushed into Alama's throat and jaw tightened. Then the alarm hardened into a resolve so precise he could count the beats between commands. He had to secure that papyrus outside the Hierophant's reach. Alone in a dim side room labeled for record-keeping, the archivist worked with fingers that did not tremble. He had permission for 10 minutes of inspection. He had used 5. He set the original papyrus on a flat board, then pressed a thin sheet over it and traced the script with soot and a reed. He copied the sigil, the inked strokes, the blood seam. Thalia stood with her arms folded, watching him keep to a precise ritual of his own. Eyes scan, hands steady, lip pinched, he whispered. They taught obedience by staging death. She nodded, throat working once. Outside the corridor, a voice undercut the quiet. Marek's hush urgent. I saw them slow the drum. Marek, when the archivist bent close, they Lysandra to press the Taurus, to repeat the chant until Aeson fell. They wanted a public lesson. Marek's words pulled the scene taut. Suspicion shifted into something sharper. Betrayal. The archivist's jaw moved. He remembered the convulsion at the slab and the way the priestess' hand had knuckled the initiand's shoulder. Betrayal compelled him to act, not simply to record. The pair hatched a course. The archivist would copy the papyrus and replace the original before anyone noticed. Thalia offered a brittle smile and a needle of help. She knew the infirmary rotes, the moments when guards changed. Marek promised to stand in a passageway and give a slow, meaningful cough if anyone approached. They divided tasks with simple, concrete steps. Borrow a skin of oil to dull the candlelight, set a line of thread to fasten the linen, time the guard rotations. Each small action was a calculated risk. A sudden footfall on the stair made them freeze. The door opened to reveal Priestess Lysandra's silhouette against a slice of daylight. What are you doing in the records? She demanded, voice clipped. They had to choose words quickly, cataloging a fragment for the infirmary. Thalia. Lysandra's gaze slid to the tray where the copied papyrus lay for drying. The priestess' hands flexed. The archivist's throat was dry. He let a pause lengthen, then said, We will show the Hierophant the notes at assembly. That answer bought them the hour they needed. At the great hall in the evening, the assembly filled in a churn of wool and murmurs. The archivist felt the weight of faces. He placed the copied papyrus on the dais and unrolled it with the ritual care he had learned as an apprentice. Palm at the corner, thumb to keep the curl. Marek stood nearby, pale and trembling, and then he spoke in a voice that shaved through the hall. Aeson convulsed because the priestess deepened the trance. I saw them instruct her. Those words were short and sharp. A wave of noise rose. Lysandra's lips thinned. The priestess moved to counter with a demonstration. She called for a near-death lesson, and the initiand was forced back to the slab. She ordered the chamber drums and the assistants to slow, and she pressed the Taurus in the center of the ritual robe. The initiand's eyes rolled. His breathing thinned. The room watched every talk of muscle. The archivist kept his hands folded and let his mouth stay closed while evidence and spectacle collided. The crowd divided in the small lines that form when trust fractures. Voices escalated into accusation. You tampered with a holy process. Lysandra snapped. You invite profanation. You engineered a lesson without consent. Marek retorted. The Hierophant Elias intervened with a command that cracked like knuckles. Stop this at once. We will decide. Then Thalia stepped forward with a healed hand and a steadier claim. He found a papyrus beneath the ribs. He copied it to prove what you denied. The exchange gathered speed. The hall became a machine of questions and short defenses. The archivist's words were few but precise. The priestess chose to force clarity through action. She ordered a public demonstration of her technique, designed to show that the rite could be controlled for instruction, and that any suggestion otherwise came from malice. She moved like someone pressing a point on a map and spoke commands that had the congregation replicate breathing and drum cadence. The initiand convulsed again on command. His body obeyed the rhythm the priestess set. That demonstration fractured the assembly. Some people cheered its correctness. Others cried foul at the spectacle. A heated argument became physical. An acolyte lunged at Lysandra, and a scuffle unfurled near the dais. Guards pushed into the gap. The archivist stepped back, and his shoulder struck a wooden pillar. His hand closed around his satchel strap. He heard the scrape of sandals and the sound of a copper bowl overturned. In the scuffle, someone tore the linen away and the original papyrus fell free, edge first, then flattened on the floor where scuff marks stained its margin. That sight was a turning point. The original had been exposed despite their careful plan. Marek shouted the word that shifted suspicion into accusation. They staged the death, the hall echoed. Lysandra answered with an order for cleansing and purge. Remove him for cleansing, she said. The Hierophant hesitated, weighing the factions that had formed. Healer Thalia interposed herself physically between the guards and the initiand and claimed, He must be moved to the infirmary for observation. Her action slowed the hand of Alias enough for the archivist to step forward and show the copied papyrus in his palm. He read a single line aloud. Precise words of ritual notation that matched the marks on the original and named the stage, where a chant was extended to induce the death-like state. The assembly stilled to hear the technical detail. That reading changed something. A group in the hall began to murmur about oversight. Another group hardened toward purge. The archivist felt emotion move in him again, resolve tightening into a cautious hope when allies formed. Then a low fear when he realized how many wanted the school's secrecy preserved. He watched Merrick shrink into himself as if the boy's courage had cost him something. The archivist's choices had made him central to a struggle over who kept authority over life and death. After the assembly, the cloister's corridors changed tone. Factions slipped into side rooms to whisper tactics. Thalia and Marek stood with the archivist in the abandoned ritual chamber at dusk and counted next steps. Marek's hands kept folding and unfolding a strip of linen. Thalia checked a jar of salve and then set it aside. They agreed to spread copies of the papyrus to trusted healers in the city and to secure one copy beyond the cloister's walls. The archivist took the copied sheet, rolled it into a tube, and sealed it with wax. Each action was deliberate. Leave at the merchant stall at dawn, a small marker on the east bench, a name whispered to an ally. That night, the archivist made his way back to the infirmary under the pretense of restocking herbs. He moved along the shadowed walkways with the careful gait of someone accustomed to being watched. 2 guards walked past him without a glance. Marek met him briefly in a side passage and slid a folded scrap into his palm. Marek's eyes were bloodshot. If they bring a censure, Marek, tell Thalia to burn the lower roll. Tell her not to trust Elias with that list. The archivist nodded and felt a shift inside him. Doubt had become strategy. A new discovery arrived before dawn. A traveler at the eastern gate, a woman who handled the cloth stalls, had seen a sealed letter placed at her counter and had taken it to a healer known for discretion. The healer, an ally the archivist had once helped in exchange for a favor, delivered a small chest to the archivist's door that morning. No seal from the cloister, but the school's sigil carved on the lid. Inside sat a small parcel, the original papyrus folded and wrapped, and a single charcoal sketch of a torus device with marginal notes in Lysandra's handwriting. The sketch made the mechanism concrete, a narrow ring that, when pressed and accompanied by a prolonged chant, compressed breathing and induced a trance. The revelation was a twist that changed the meaning of earlier events. It replaced speculation with a tangible artifact. The archivist spread the sketch on his table and read the marginal notes aloud in short sentences. Pulse slows. Breath tightens. Repeat 3rd bar until collapse. He pronounced the instruction as if cataloguing a plague. Thalia leaned over the table and touched a margin with a fingertip, leaving a grease print. She meant to teach obedience with fear. Thalia, voice low. The archivist felt rage rise in him, not as a flood but as a tightening in his chest and a double, hand grip on the grimoire's strap. He could not let the school redefine death as a pedagogical instrument without oversight. That conviction sharpened his next choices. They planned a public disclosure for the next morning, one that would call witnesses from neighboring guilds and produce the papyrus and the sketch as proof. Merrick would testify again, this time with a ledger of those who had witnessed altered cadences in other rites. Thalia would offer medical testimony on how the device and chant could be fatal. The archivist prepared his remarks with quiet care. Short sentences, named facts, a clear reading of the papyrus, and direct charges. He wrote each line, and then crossed it out and rewrote it until the words matched the evidence without flourishes. As dusk bled toward night, the cloister's factions solidified. A small group gathered in the shadows and pressed a palm against the door of the archivist's room. He waited, hands folded, the rolled copy of the papyrus under his pillow. The door did not open. Instead, a soft footfall passed, and Merrick slipped a colophon copy into his palm and mouthed, "They'll be at the southern gate tonight." The archivist felt the chapter's stakes align. Exposure had made him a target. The school's secrecy now had defenders who would act. The final concrete beat of the evening was Merrick's warning, and the sound of footsteps on the stairs as the cloister locked itself against the city. By the chapter's close, two camps formed in the cloister, those who insisted on public accountability and those who demanded ritual integrity and secrecy. The archivist had secured copies, allies, and a plan, but he also knew that the next move would be decisive. He walked the cloister's walkways once more, checked the sealed copy under his robe, and felt the weight of clay light in his palm. He had forced the right into the open, and the institution had begun to fracture. The immediate censure was delayed by a mixture of fear and politics. The true test would come at the southern gate when men arrived to enforce silence or to demand proof. The chapter ended on the locked step and Merrick's whispered warning rather than an abstract promise, an action that pulled the story forward into the next conflict. The blade flashed at the archivist's throat as High Priestess Mera leaned forward and held the carved steel with both hands. Betrayal tightened the archivist's jaw. He kept his shoulders still while two acolytes tightened the leather straps across his wrists. "Speak, Mera, answer for the ruin you've brought to the right." The cavern smelled of tallow and iron. Voices from the gallery scraped like stones. The first 5 sentences placed the immediate danger. The priestess blade, the accusation, and the choice he must make. The audience sees the conflict, atonement or execution, within seconds. The archivist had been hauled into this vault 2 nights earlier with guards and thin accusations. Now the accusation had hardened into an ultimatum that would force obedience or reveal treachery. He had come for manuscripts, not for a trial. The archivist's hands were bound, but his mind catalogued everything. The scar on Mira's left knuckle, the damp weave of the floor mat beneath the slab, the chalk ring on the days that matched an illustration he had catalogued months earlier. That inventory kept him precise. He watched for small signals. He watched for the moment a guard blinked or a candle guttered. "You altered the draught," Maraha addressing the circle. "You falsified initiation." Her voice did not waver. But one of the acolytes, a young man with a chipped nose, looked away. "You placed doubt in the right archivist. How do you answer?" The word betrayal had to live in his body, not as an abstract accusation. Betrayal had a taste. The copper on his tongue when he was thrown among the accused. A tightening in his throat when an acolyte he had trusted. Leto met his eyes and did not blink. The archivist's mouth was dry. He inhaled once, counting the breath to steady his voice. "I did not falsify the right," he said. "I examined the draught. I made notes that rose heresy." Mera returned, notes that could undo revelation. She lifted the blade a fraction. The guard captain, Hadran, shifted his weight. The chain around his wrist held the ceremonial key. The trial was public theater. Every word calibrated to reinforce obedience. The real question was whether the theater hid a tool of domination. A secondary fear moved through him, fear that the rite itself was a mechanism of control. That fear sharpened into suspicion when acolyte Leto stepped forward, palms open, his robe smeared at the cuff. It was altered. Leto, not by him, by the preparation. By those who run the rituals. By those who stood above the slab. He spat the last words and then turned his face to the crowd. "I changed the draught. I made it stronger. I can show you the jar." Leto's confession emptied the chamber of pretense and filled it with new danger. The emotion shifted in the room. From accusation to incredulity to immediate, prickling fear among the council acolytes. Voices rose. Mera's eyes narrowed until they were 2 black lines. Hadran's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked in the guard captain's temple. "Leto, Miraha," and the name landed like a command. "Explain." Her tone invited loyalty and demanded alignment. This was the tribunal's design. Force a public realignment. Leto dropped to his knees and pointed down the corridor, toward the preparation alcove. "I added the bitter root. I ground it with the night black salt. I did it because the ritual needed edge. The visions would come sharper. I wanted proof of truth." He struck his palm against the flagstone. "I wanted to be sure." His voice cracked between defiance and shame. 3 rapid exchanges followed, Hadran interposing, Mera questioning the motive, the archivist asking a single direct question. "Why would you do that, Leto?" Hadran, because the old ways felt thin. Leto shot back, because revelations tasted faint, and we wanted authority. He looked at Mira. Because you would not grant it without a show. Mira's reply was a whisper that carried. You endangered the Initiant. The tribunal folded inward on itself. Now betrayal had new textures. Not only Leto's guilt, but a network of engineering revealed. The archivist's mouth moved. Who else knows? Leto hesitated. He named 3 acolytes, and then dropped the 4th name toward the dais where shadows pooled. A single acolyte, older, with a thin scar across his brow, took a step back and then a step forward. I prepared the braziers, he said. I mixed the paper. I did not know the root's degree, the chamber reeled. The ritual that claimed to make death teach had been modified to manufacture clarity. Stronger draughts, staged collapse, direction toward particular visions. The archivist felt the shape of control press against his ribs. His choices narrowed. He could confess publicly and point fingers and risk immediate execution. He could refuse the right and be silenced. Or he could accept the near death and hope to learn something he could use. Mera's face did not change beyond a cold 30-degree turn. Archivist, she said, addressing him now with the voice she used for lessons. You can atone and step through the boundary, or you can be removed. Speak. He saw the faces in the gallery, men and women who had once looked to documents when they had questions. He saw the acolyte who had given him directions to the archive months ago. He remembered the morning he had counted the loose coins in the satchel he had been handed by a clerk to secure permission to dust the shelves. Those concrete details formed his baseline. He was lean 45 with weathered spectacles, the grimoire heavy beneath his robes. He understood what he had come to do and what the cost might be. I will submit to the passage, he said. He let the words fall with measured cadence. This choice was tactical, to survive the rite, to observe the mechanisms firsthand, and to carry evidence away. Mera inclined her head, then lie still. They prepared him. Smoke coiled. An acolyte held a cup to his lips. He tasted the draught, bitter root and iron, and a salt that made the tongue numb. The archivist kept his eyes open to the ceiling to feel whether the chandeliers trembled. He felt the straps cut into his wrists. He heard Leto whisper, "Forgive me," and then a footstep as Leto stepped back into the gallery. The first shift came as physical panic. The draught burned down his throat and his vision tunneled. He counted tactile details, a pebble in his right shoe, the braided thread of his robe by the hem, to anchor himself. The world narrowed to surfaces and movement. He felt his pulse become a flat instrument against the slab. Then the liminal passage opened. He did not fold into an abstract mist. The vision arrived with concrete images. A painted map of the coastal settlements with a red dot at the hill outside the city. A ledger entry in his own hand, altered with a second number. A child's voice reciting the names of 3 men who had profited from ritual fees. Each image hit with a precision that read like a found document. The archive's method of revelation fed him facts rather than poetry. When he blinked awake, someone pressed a cloth against his brow. Mera peered down, not with mercy but with the sterile appraisal of a teacher checking work. "What did you see?" she asked. He heard the map and the ledger and the child's voice. He named the 3 men. Mera's lips pinched. There was a long silence while acolytes exchanged small motions. An elbow tapped, a candle was nudged lower. The chamber had shifted toward a new arrangement of power. You have been given names. Mara, you had a vision that serves us. Prove the accuracy of your sight. Lead us to the hill at dawn and the ledger at dusk. The offer was another instrument. It turned revelation into proof that could justify violence or retribution. The archivist's next emotional turn was a subtle one, from tactical obedience to a quietly burning resolve. He would use the instruction to test the vision and to check whether the ledger existed unaltered in the municipal offices. He would also try to secure the physical fragment he had come for. The chamber split into factions. Leto's fame as confessor kept some acolytes near him. Hadran argued for a small guard to accompany the archivist to authenticate the ledger. Mera proposed they send a pair of oath-bound watchmen. Each proposal was a maneuver, each voice shaped who would carry authority after this night. Acolyte Leto moved with surprising speed. He darted between bodies and seized the ceremonial blade from the dais with hands that did not tremble. Enough, Leto shouted, no more controlled visions. No more delivery of power through engineered deaths. He raised the blade high. The action broke the pattern of ceremony. Acolytes who had been placid minutes before now formed lines. Leto dropped the blade. Hadran barked. Leto did not drop it. He thrust forward and declared, I will end this hierarchy. I will carve new order from the rites. His words incited a raw division. A rapid exchange of 6 short lines followed. Leto, you are reckless, Hadran snapped. Hadran, you defend the vault's profits. Leto replied, Mera, you made the bargain, Hadran. Archivist, plead your case, Mera ordered. Archivist, stand aside. Leto cried, stop. The archivist rasped, holding up his hands. The movement turned into a struggle. Leto's action smashed into the chamber's choreography. Some acolytes rushed to seize him. Others stood frozen, watching the fissure form. The guard captain pushed forward, trying to wrest the blade free. Mara moved like a teacher stepping into a fight to correct a student. Precise, compact, intending to restore order with minimal theatrics. The archivist did not remain passive. He twisted his wrists against the straps, loosened a knot with a practiced flick of his fingers born of years of handling bindings while cataloguing scrolls. He surged forward and grabbed for the blade, aiming not to kill but to divert. Metal clanged against metal. Sparks spit across a nearby brazier and a shawl caught. Flame climbed fabric. Chaos snapped through the cavern. Acolytes shoved, bodies met, a candle fell and rolled into spilled oil. Hadran shouted and struck a man who had lunged. Mera shoved past them and grabbed Leto's wrist. Leto! She barked, and the single word cut through the noise. Leto twisted. He struck Hadran across the face with the blade's hilt. Blood opened at the guard captain's slip. The sound of metal on bone, a dull clack, made several acolytes recoil. The ritual circle fractured into small fights. The archivist kept his hold on the blade and counted a chain of rapid choices. Secure the fragment, get to the alcove where the manuscripts were kept, or collapse and be trampled. He chose retrieval. He had not come to die. He lurched toward the broken lectern where a small manuscript had been left open, his target months ago. Acolytes crowded him. He saw the torn page peeking from beneath a leather strap. He reached and tore the page free with his teeth when hands closed around his sleeve. Archivist! Hadran roared, more pain than order. The guard captain's hand gripped his shoulder and wrenched. The archivist twisted, slipped a finger under the page, and felt the blood from Hadran's cut smear across the margin. One of the names in the ledger was underlined with a line drawn in what looked like fresh iron ink. Acolyte Leto lunged, shoved, and managed to wrench the blade loose. He swung at the brazier and knocked it over. Fire licked the carved stone, and smoke pushed inward like a hand. The cavern route became a gauntlet. The ritual circle broke into smaller clusters fighting for survival and advantage. The archivist shoved past and ran down the corridor toward the preparation alcove, the torn manuscript clutched at his chest. He heard Mira curse under her breath and then order, seal the exit. They stumbled into the alcove. Shelves scraped, jars fell and shattered. The narrow passage offered cover and danger in equal measure. The archivist moved with the frayed knowledge of building interiors. He ducked into a low niche and pressed himself against cool stone. He fumbled the page into his satchel and closed the flap. From the corridor came the sound of boots and a shout. Hadran's voice called, "Hold! Whoever takes the fragment holds the truth." Then, in an altered cadence, he barked orders to his men to secure exits. The sound meant that the chamber was splitting into those who would chase and those who would hold. The archivist found a small tunnel that led upward, a maintenance conduit he had once inspected on a cataloging run. He crawled, scraping his palms against rough mortar, and emerged into a service stair that cut toward dawn. Behind him, the cavern's noise became a distant drum. Shouts, the collapse of wooden racks, the occasional cry of pain. He reached an upper store close to the city rim, where the sky showed a thin thread of pale light. Dawn would come in 30 minutes. He sat on an overturned crate and took inventory. His wrists raw where the straps had been, his spectacles smudged with soot. a smear of iron ink on his forefinger. The torn page lay in his lap, and the names on it could topple alliances. Emotion shifted again. Where fear had once governed his choices, now a cold clarity moved through him. He felt the weight of knowledge, the concrete ledger entry, and the map coordinates stamped into his mind from the vision. He thought of the child voice reciting names. He thought of the ledger's altered number. Each concrete datum tightened the plan he could form. Outside, a footstep touched the stair. The archivist froze. Hadron's silhouette filled the stair mouth, panting, a hand pressed to his lip. Behind him, another figure followed. Leto, robe singed at the hem, eyes wide but steady. Archivist, Hadran, the name rough in his mouth. You took the fragment. He stepped closer so they stood only a breath apart. Hand it over. Leto moved to the side and observed with a new rhythm to his speech. Not the rawness of earlier, but a sharpened hunger. He has the fragment. Leto, his vision is the proof. The archivist kept his hands visible and drew the satchel toward him slowly. I will show you the ledger, he said. We go to the municipal hall together. I will show you where the number was changed. Then you can do what you must. The sentence was an offer. The archivist's fingers trembled, but his voice did not. Hadron studied him. The guard captain's eyes moved across his face, and then to the satchel. If you betray us, Hadron began. If I betray you, the archivist. Then the ledger will prove it. They sealed a fragile pact. Hadron nodded and gestured down. Leto followed with a look that was not quite forgiveness and not quite surrender. They moved through streets that still smelled of night, fish and braziers. When they arrived at the municipal hall, the archivist's pulse hammered, not from fear but from the strain of staging the revelation. He led them to the ledger's shelf. The municipal clerk who read the entry at first refused to believe the change until the archivist produced the torn page. The clerk's fingers brushed the margin, found the iron ink, and then froze. This number was altered, he whispered. He pointed to the name underlined in the ink. Hadran and Leto listened. Hadran's mouth hardened. He turned to the clerk and said, seal this room. Do not let this leave. The command locked the municipal office into a cold procedure. The clerk obeyed with an efficient, frightened motion that betrayed personal stakes. The twist came when Leto produced a second confession, this one written, not spoken. A ledger note that named a supplier of the bitter root, a merchant who had delivered quantities on invoices that matched ritual dates. The supplier was a man who kept a ledger with receipts that intersected with the municipal books. The two records, placed side by side, revealed a chain of profit flowing from ritual fees into merchant accounts and then into the hands of certain council acolytes. The revelation changed the target of punishment from abstract heresy to concrete profiteering. Hadron's decision was immediate. We bring them in, he said. We arrest the merchant and the acolytes who profited. We bring witnesses. His voice carried the tone of a man ordering a campaign. Merah's reaction arrived as a message carried by a courier sent from the cavern. She came herself hours later, robes clean and face composed, with two attendants at her shoulder. Her entry into the municipal hall was precise. She placed both palms on the ledger and read the ink with an odd reverence. Then she looked at the archivist. You exposed a rot, she said. Her voice was not a condemnation now. It was a teacher's assessment. You also brought fire into our house. There will be consequences for the broken order. Her eyes lingered on Hadran, then on Leto, then back to the archivist. You may have saved the right from corruption. But you have also torn the fabric that keeps us whole. The consequence was procedural. Hadran would arrest the merchant and several acolytes. Leto would be monitored, given a task that placed him under watch. The archivist would be required to remain in custody for a week while the council examined the manuscripts and the ledger with official witnesses. That week in custody was not introspection, it was labor. The archivist spent hours sitting across from clerks who read and reread his torn page and matched the ink to municipal entries. He questioned witnesses, he recorded sworn statements. He moved through specific tasks that slowly built a public case. Each day brought an external event. An arrest, a new confession, a document discovered in a treasury chest. He worked with a terse efficiency that left little room for rumination. At dawn on the 8th day, Hadron led him back to the hidden archive above the city. The archivist carried the fragment in a padded roll under his robe. The roof room smelled of dust and lemon oil where a lamp had been left burning. He set the roll on the long table and unrolled it. The fragment's margin held an annotation in a child's hand, small, precise letters naming an amount and a house. The voice from the vision had been a real child, the child of a clerk who had recorded gifts to acolytes. The chain of evidence now included a living witness. The clerk's daughter, who recognized the handwriting and came forward to testify. Her arrival and identification were external events that tightened the prosecution. Emotion in the final passages is carried in behavior. The archivist's hands shook when he read the child's letters. He folded and re-folded the fragment, smoothing the edges as if they were fragile bone. He did not speak of destiny. He catalogued names, dates, and receipts. He highlighted items with a pencil and set them into labeled bundles. When the council convened to pass judgment, Mera entered and did not stand at the dais. She sat with Hadron and Leto and watched as evidence was read aloud. The council removed 4 acolytes from their posts and suspended the merchants' licenses. The city magistrate ordered a formal inquiry into ritual preparation. After the council adjourned, the archivist slipped back into the archive alone. He slid the torn page into a chest and shut the lid. The sun reached the rim of the city and warmed the stone. He felt exhausted and raw, but not transformed by inspirational speech. He felt the specific consequence of weeks of labor. A ledger corrected, names cleared or accused, and a city that would no longer accept ritual engineering without scrutiny. He had one remaining decision. He could publish his findings and force full prosecution, risking reprisals to anyone still tied to the cult, or he could bury the fragment, preserving the fragile lives still attached to the rite. The choice moved him physically. He opened a false bottom of the stone chest, pressed the fragment into the gap, and slid a flagstone loose in the archive floor. He slid the piece beneath and tamped the stone back to its place. Then he did another thing that concluded his arc concretely. He wrote a short note and placed it in the chest's outer compartment addressed to Hadron. A set of instructions to watch Myrahas' movements and to protect Leto if he cooperated. He closed the chest, secured it with a worn strap, and carried the key to Hadron. Outside the archive a single messenger waited, breath misting in the cold air. Hadron took the key. He met the archivist's eye and nodded once. "You did what you had to do, Hadron." The archivist considered the words, measured the syllables, and then shook his head. He did not accept the phrase as comfort. He only answered with a concrete plan. "Watch the merchant's house tonight. Bring witnesses at first light." Hadron agreed and turned away. The archivist watched him go, feeling the distinct physical looseness in his shoulders that comes after a fight. He put his spectacles back on, dusted a smudge from the grimoire's cover, and, with the sun higher now, he closed the heavy oak door behind him. At dawn he had chosen to carry the knowledge to test the vision, and to use municipal law to break a profit chain. He had also buried a piece of paper under stone to keep fragile lives safe. He stepped into a street where merchants were already setting stalls. A child ran by and dropped a wooden toy. The archivist bent, picked it up, and handed it back without a word. He did not feel triumphant. He felt the tangible fatigue of someone who had worked through a problem and left things in motion. At the threshold of the market, a single footstep approached from behind. The archivist turned. Leto stood there, robe patched and smudged, an uncertain shadow in his expression. "Leto, the archivist, they'll watch me," Leto replied, "but I have the brazier notes. I kept a copy. I can testify if needed." He held out a folded scrap of paper. The archivist took it. He slid the scrap into his satchel and then made a concrete request. "Stay away from the cavern tonight. Go to the north gate and wait for Hadron's men. If you cooperate, you'll be safe." Leto nodded, fingers clumsy. "I will." They parted without flourish. The archivist walked toward the river where the light lay flat on the water. He had closed the chest, moved the ledger, arranged arrests, and set watches. He had preserved lives by burying evidence and used official channels to punish the profiteers. The choices were concrete and costly. At the archive door he stopped, looked back at the city, and felt the ache of responsibility in his ribs, a physical tightness when he imagined reprisals. He folded his hands and tucked them into his robe. Then he moved on, carrying the grimoire, the satchel, and the knowledge that decisions would ripple. At dawn he closed the stone chest and slid the blood-inked fragment beneath a loosened flagstone, listening for the single step that would decide the fragment's fate.